You know, as someone who cannot fall asleep on an airplane, I was having like physical discomfort watching Desmond fall asleep in that suspended like animation thing. Was that just me or was that anyone else? Hello, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well, and I am here to review the second episode of Dune Prophecy, this episode titled Two Wolves. I continue to really enjoy this show. Like, it is... I tend to try to not to look at reviews for shows that I'm reviewing before I at least review it myself, but I've been particularly kind of interested in the response to the show because it has been more like middling, tepid to even negative, and I was curious to see if response to this episode had changed anybody's mind, and I didn't really expect it to, but I was sort of seeing where the trend was going, and it kind of remained the same, which is surprising to me to some degree, because I see all the criticisms, like the critique that it's slow, that it's a lot of like intricate politics stuff, that there's not anything like super like exciting, engaging happening at every single moment or something like that. And I'm not saying like, oh, people don't get it or whatever. I certainly think that those are all legitimate criticisms. But for me, the show is just hitting on stuff that I really like. And again, maybe it's the Star Trek nerd in me who just loves people sitting around boardrooms and talking. But I just am enjoying the politics of this show. And I also think the other strength of the show is just its freaking visuals are amazing. I think in particular, I'm getting into the story bits about it, but I just want to describe this. The sequence where we see the agony, where we get to see Lila, I think it's Lila, go back and like meet all the different people throughout her genetic history, and it's just being like this crowd sort of coming at her that eventually does kill her in a very tragic scene, I think was just really gorgeously represented. The whole show kind of has that vibe, but even there was the one shot that I know is kind of based off the movies to a degree, but there was that one shot where they had the ship coming down from that big space hole ship. It was just one of those like outer space shots, and it reminded me of like those 1970s sci-fi covers that you would get that were like these really strange painted beautiful covers that we don't get a lot of nowadays. I think like the Expanse books are kind of the closest I can think coming to that, and even those are a bit busier than I think those old 1970s covers were. So it's just the visuals of this are amazing. The politics I particularly find very interesting, even if they aren't exactly like super exciting, like bouncing off the page. But I think there's just a lot of fun intricacies woven throughout this show that feels very in line with what Dune is. And I'm enjoying it overall. To get into some of the nitty gritty, since the title is talking about two wolves, this episode kind of splits itself between two different storylines, where we have Sister Valia going to the central seat of the Imperium to sort of deal with all the goings on there, and then Tula dealing with Lila. Again, I'm hopefully getting these names right, going through the agony. And I think this is a smart move. I think both of the actors, Tula and Valia, are the two strongest actors in the show. So I think sort of getting them to separate and sort of lead their respective storylines is the smartest and I think strongest move of this. And I loved seeing all the fallout with Valia going on in the palace. There was just, again, there's a lot of cool intrigue going on here. Like we have an Atreides, the swordmaster, helping the rebellion, but also having feelings for the princess. We have Desmond continues to be like my kind of favorite part of the show. I'm just loving his performance, where he's just very slightly unhinged, and you get the sense that he could like lash out at any point, because you don't feel like he's completely all there anymore. But he also seems like he has a plan, and the plan seems to also be very calculated. And it's this weird like duality within him of like, he feels like he's just like this kind of wild guy ready to do whatever, and yet also seems very calculated at the same time. And it's this strange performance that works really well for me. It's a really narrow line to walk, and I could see it not working for some, but it's just it draws me in. And I especially think that he might even be my favorite actor on the show, despite me complimenting all the actors. I mean, everyone in the show is a strong actor, but he's just giving such a weird performance, and I always enjoy stuff like that. And his slow manipulation of everyone in the situation of like, like, hey, I'm here to serve the Imperium. I am here against the Bene Gesserit, is really cool. And that final confrontation that we get at the end of the episode, where we get Valia sort of going up against him and using the voice, and he just nothing happens. And I love his final line of like, oh, I wanted to know what your biggest fear was. It's not that no one would hear you, it's that people would hear you and they wouldn't listen. And that cuts so deep. I can feel it's such a strong ending line that I really loved, and it kind of cuts to the heart of who she is. It feels like I'm loving all these little hints, and the performance is fantastic on Valia's part. Where she's clearly, like, obviously she's trying to further the Bene Gesserit and like their power, but you can also tell there's like a sense of self-satisfaction. Like, for example, there's that one moment where she's talking to the people in the palace, and they make mention of the fact that they know Atreides is the spy in the palace for the rebellion, and you can just see this like slight twinge of a smile on her mouth, where you realize that comes from, she knows she can get a little bit of revenge at Atreides for what they did to her family years and years ago during the War with the Thinking Machines. And again, it's not overstated. It's not a big deal, but you can interpret so much from that, and you get a lot of that like sense of personal vendetta that comes from it. I really did like that, and it's just a very, very strong performance overall. I also like, again, the continuing growth of Mark Strong as the Duke. I said last week, like, he is a very weak emperor. And that extends to this episode. He is a very weak emperor as well. Here, where he's kind of just listening to whoever has the strongest point near him, but doesn't really have much of a backbone of his own. And as the Bene Gesserit literally say in this episode, his weakness is not to their benefit at this point. So I like just seeing that, his weakness cannot be a positive for the Bene Gesserit or not, depending on the situation and who's sort of whispering in his ear at the moment, given the situation. And I think Mark Strong plays it really, really well. Again, another great acting performance where he is an actor who you expect to always have this gravitas, and yet he gives this sense of like you can understand why he is the emperor and why he sort of holds that position, and then you also get this sense of indecision and weakness from him at the same time. And that's, again, a hard balance to walk for an actor, and Mark Strong, I think, is really pulling it off. I'm trying to think if there's anything else going on here. We have some of the stuff with the sisters, with some more political machinations, like giving away information during sex with the prince. The sex scene was fine. This is a larger conversation for another day. I don't mind sex scenes in TV shows or movies or anything. I know there's kind of a push for there to be less, and sometimes people pushing for there to be more. I'm personally kind of fine with it, but I also never want it to be overly gratuitous, and especially like hyper fixated on just like, ooh, look at the woman in the element of this. And yes, we get some sexy shots of the dude in here, but it does start off with like, oh, look at her boobs, and we get a lot of like the long shots of her breasts. It's not the worst I've seen of that, but I'm just like, it's fine. Do we have to be as male gazy, I guess, as this is being? It's just one of those things where it's like, it's not the worst in the world. I'm not offended. Certainly, as a bisexual person, I'm not bothered by either of them in any way, shape, or form. But it's just one of those like, I can tell that it was a dude who directed this episode, which is kind of weird for a show about the Bene Gesserit. So it was just one of those things like, could have been better on just the way that scene was shot. It's, again, not the end of the world. I know people will get angry at me in the comments for saying all this, but it's just one of those things like, The other element of this episode, we get everything back with the Bene Gesserit homeworld. Again, I'm still not... I think the weakness of that side of the storyline is I just didn't know all of the younger Bene Gesserit women in the storyline. We have this one girl that we're focusing on who's like wondering about a mother, and obviously her mother was the person that was killed in the first episode by Valia, and that sort of leads to her getting revenge in the sort of the agony ceremony. But it's like I didn't have a strong attachment to this character beforehand, so her death and her sort of wrestling with the decision didn't land as hard for me, as well as just sort of the other kids, I guess they're kids, like other younger Bene Gesserit students. I also don't know enough about to really be invested in the storyline. I think that that's probably the biggest weakness of the show, especially if the show is going to be furthering the storylines with them. I think they really need to do a lot of heavy lifting to get me like into the storyline with all them, because I'm into all the politics going on the other side of the story, but all the sort of dynamics within the Bene Gesserit itself, I'm not as fully invested in, and I think it comes down to just not knowing the characters all that well. So I think that that's where the show really needs to tighten up to really get some better. But overall, I mean, it was a fine storyline, and again, I love the visuals of the agony ceremony. I thought it was really good. So yeah, overall, I think that's pretty much everything that I have at the moment. Like I said, I'm going to refrain from speculating on where we're going to be going with this show, just because I know that there's been many books that I have not read in this series, that so if I start speculating, people in the comments are just going to be like, well, actually, it's probably this thing and this thing. Believe me, I'm not offended by that. Like, please go ahead and speculate. I don't mind spoilers. Just give spoiler warnings for other people. I just know that when other people talk about Star Trek, I'm that person in the comments. So I just don't want to open up, because I'll just open it up to people being frustrated who know better than I do, understandably so. So let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this show. Are you liking it? You loving it? You hating it? Are you bothered by it? Are you bored by it? I'd be curious to hear all about all of that. But beyond that, my friends, I hope y'all live long and prosper.